They mocked the seal who bought a $1 ruin, until the night his K9 exposed the truth buried beneath the mountain. Snow hammered Blacktail Ridge as a lone Navy SEAL, and his loyal K9 fought to rebuild a shattered cabin the town swore would kill them. But when a deadly blizzard struck and a family's lives hung in the balance, the ridge revealed a secret no one in Mill Creek was ready for. The auction room inside the old Granite County Courthouse felt colder than the Montana wind outside. Dust floated in the slanted winter sunlight, settling on the rows of wooden benches where farmers, ranchers, and curious townsfolk gathered with their jackets zipped high.
Good job. Welcome back.
The place smelled faintly of old paper, wet boots, and the coffee someone had spilled earlier. No one was here to buy anything. They were here to watch a spectacle they'd already decided the ending of. Up front, the auctioneer, a thin man with a thick mustache, cleared his throat and tapped a finger on his clipboard. "Item 12, he announced. "One parcel on Blacktail Ridge. Includes 40 acres and one condemned structure. Opening bid, $1. The room erupted in soft laughter. A couple of ranch hands nudged each other. Someone in the back muttered, "Should pay us to take that thing." Heads shook, smirks spread. Everyone knew the cabin, if you could still call it that. It was little more than a sagging skeleton of wood and memory, clinging to the ridge like it was too tired to fall. The auctioneer waited. "Any bids?" Silence. Someone coughed. Another chuckled. Then a steady voice cut through the room. $1. Dozens of eyes swung toward the source. Standing in the back row was a tall man with close-cropped dark hair flecked in early gray. His face was weathered, the kind of worn that comes from deserts, deployments, and nights without sleep. Former Navy SEAL Luke Harlow didn't flinch under the sudden attention. He simply raised his hand once, firm and unshaking. Beside him sat his K9 partner, Rex, a German shepherd with amber eyes that scanned the room with more awareness than most people there. The auctioneer blinked. $1. We have one. Any other bids?" He waited. 8 seconds. Not a single hand moved. "Sold," he said quickly, stamping the paper as if relieved to remove the cursed property from the county's books. "To the gentleman in the back." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly, but it wasn't kind either. It carried the tone of people who had already written the ending for a man they didn't know. Whispered comments rose like smoke. "Poor guy. Must be desperate. Heard he came back from the service. Not the same. That cabin'll finish him faster than winter will. Lasted longer in combat than he will up there." Luke walked forward, Rex matching his steps like a shadow. He signed the transfer papers without hesitation. His hands were rough, scarred in old patterns that told stories no one dared ask about. Rex sat at his heel, posture straight, as if the dog took pride in this strange purchase his partner just made. When Luke turned to leave, the murmurs grew louder. Someone muttered just loud enough for him to hear, "Crazy vet won't last a week." Another added, "That dog's smarter than he is." Luke paused only for a breath, just long enough for the humiliation to rise, to sting the back of his throat. But he didn't look back. He didn't need their approval, and he didn't need to explain the decision that had pulled him from the quiet corner of his rented trailer to this courthouse. What mattered was forward motion. One step, then another. Outside, the Montana winter greeted him with a punch of cold air. The courthouse doors creaked shut behind him, muffling the voices inside. Rex trotted ahead a few feet, then looked back, tail swaying gently as if asking, "What now?" Luke exhaled a slow breath that plumed white in the air. "Well, partner," he murmured, adjusting the pack slung over his shoulder. "Looks like we've got ourselves a place." Rex let out a soft woof of approval, as if he'd never doubted the choice for a second. His trust was absolute, quiet, steady, and undeserved in Luke's mind. But it was the only trust that mattered. They walked across the courthouse steps toward the truck waiting in the gravel lot. An old silver pickup with dents on every side but a warm blanket laid neatly on the passenger seat for Rex. The sky overhead was a dim wash of gray, the kind that promised snow before nightfall. Somewhere far north, the Blacktail Ridge cabin stood in ruins, open to the wind and the world. But it belonged to Luke now. And as Rex hopped into the truck and settled into place, Luke looked out at the white horizon and felt the faintest spark under all the shame, all the whispers, all the cold. Determination. They thought he wouldn't last a week. He planned to last the winter. He planned to rebuild. He planned to live. But first, he and Rex had to see what $1 had really bought them. The road to Blacktail Ridge wound upward like a pale scar across the mountainside, cutting through clusters of dark pines and open stretches of snow-dusted grassland. Luke drove with both hands steady on the wheel, the old engine humming beneath him. Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, head close to the window, amber eyes fixed on the wilderness ahead. The dog hadn't made a sound since they left town, but Luke could feel his alertness, every muscle ready, every breath measured. As they climbed higher, the air sharpened, the kind of cold that felt older than the land itself, seeping into metal and bone alike. The sky darkened into a heavy gray that made the afternoon look like early dusk as Blacktail Ridge finally appeared through a break in the trees, just a lonely rise of land framed by jagged pines, and on its crest, barely standing, was Luke's new property. He parked the truck behind an overgrown path and stepped out. Snow crunched under his boots. Wind pressed against his jacket. Rex jumped down and shook himself once, then went still, staring ahead with the same focus he used to track danger overseas. Luke followed the dog's gaze. The cabin looked worse than the photographs had suggested. Far worse. Its collapsed roof sagged inward, broken in a V-shape like wings snapped under too much weight. The walls leaned, bowed, and gapped in places, letting thin slivers of winter cut straight through. One window was nothing but an empty square of dark air. Another had a newspaper flapping from the frame like a torn flag. The front door hung by a single rusted hinge, knocking gently against the frame with each gust. It didn't just look abandoned, it looked defeated. Luke approached cautiously, stepping over brittle boards half buried in snow. Rex kept close, ears pricked forward. The scent of rot, wet earth, and old timber drifted from the open doorway. 100 winters had blown through these walls, and every one of them had left a mark. "This is it," Luke murmured, running his gloved fingers over a splintered log. "This is where we start." Rex sniffed a fallen beam, then moved toward the side of the cabin, where the ground dipped slightly. The dog's posture sharpened, his tail lowered. A low rumble rose from his chest, quiet but unmistakable. Luke turned at once, instincts firing the way they had on patrols long ago. "What do you see, buddy?" Rex's nose pressed into the drift of snow along the wall. Beneath the thin layer of white, something metallic glinted faintly. Luke knelt and brushed aside the snow. A rusted handle emerged. A thick iron ring bolted into what looked like a buried trapdoor. A hatch. Luke frowned. The listing hadn't mentioned anything underground. "Easy," he whispered, placing a hand on Rex's neck. "We'll come back to it. Winter first. Curiosity later." But Rex didn't move at first. His body stayed tense, posture warning, eyes fixed on the hidden door. Finally, at Luke's gentle tug, he stepped back, but kept glancing toward the buried hatch. Luke stood and scanned the ridge. The place was quiet except for the wind, but something felt unsettled, Like the land remembered things the county records didn't. A pickup truck rolled to a stop on the road below. A stocky man in a wool coat stepped out and raised a hand. Eddie Collins. Luke recognized him from the courthouse. "Thought I'd find you up here," Eddie called over the wind as he climbed the ridge. "Wanted to see if the stories were true." Luke nodded politely. "They're true." Eddie stopped beside him, breathing hard from the climb. He looked at the cabin and let out a blow of air through his teeth. "Lord have mercy. That thing's held together by rust and stubbornness." Rex positioned himself between Luke and the stranger, watching with calm intensity. Eddie rubbed his hands together. "You know the last folks who lived here? They froze. Winter of '05. Blizzard rolled in fast. Walls couldn't hold heat. Snow drifted through the windows. Sheriff found 'em 3 days later." Luke kept his eyes on the cabin. "I read the report." "You read the clean version," Eddie said. "The truth is uglier." Luke didn't respond. He didn't need the details. He'd seen enough loss in places far from Montana's ridges. But he felt the weight of those words settle on the cabin like a second snow. Eddie adjusted his hat. "You sure you want to rebuild here? It's a hard ridge. Takes from folks more than it gives." Rex stepped closer to Luke, brushing against his leg. "I've been through harder places," Luke said quietly. "This time I want something to stay standing when I'm done." Eddie studied him for a moment, long enough to see the resolve behind the calm voice. Then he nodded once and backed away. "Well, good luck. You'll need plenty of it before winter's done." When Eddie climbed back into his truck and drove off, the silence returned, thick and cold, wrapping the ridge in stillness. Luke looked at the broken cabin again. Most people saw a ruin. Most people saw a mistake. Rex nudged his hand gently, tail sweeping the snow once in quiet encouragement. Luke allowed himself the faintest smile. "All right, partner. Let's get to work." Wind howled through the gaps in the cabin walls, almost sounding like laughter. But this time, it didn't feel like mockery. It felt like a challenge. And Luke Harlow had never walked away from one of those. The next morning, thin sunlight cut across Blacktail Ridge as Luke loaded Rex into the truck. They needed supplies, real ones, tools, nails, tarps, gloves, lumber, and coffee strong enough to keep a man awake through a Montana night. The cabin's broken bones weren't going to fix themselves, and winter waited for no one. Mill Creek was the closest town, a quiet place tucked between the mountains and the frozen river. It should have felt peaceful, but Luke sensed the stares before he even stepped out of the truck. Folks recognized him, the man who bought the cursed cabin for a single $1. News traveled fast in places like this. Rex hopped out beside him, tail steady, eyes scanning calmly. The dog's presence made Luke feel grounded, even in towns where he didn't belong. He pushed open the door to Bishop's General Store, and a small bell jingled overhead. The warm air inside smelled of coffee, pine cleaner, and sackflower. Shelves were lined with everything from canned beans to lantern oil. Behind the counter stood Martha Bishop, a heavy-set woman in her late 50s with a steel-gray braid and a stare sharp enough to cut rope. She didn't smile. "Well," she said, folding her arms, "if it isn't the man who bought Blacktail's mistake." Luke kept his voice level. "Morning. Need supplies." Martha raised an eyebrow. "Supplies? Honey, you'd need a demolition crew, an exorcist, and a miracle to make that shack livable." Soft laughter rippled from 2 ranch hands standing near the stove. Rex stepped closer to Luke, his shoulder brushing against Luke's leg in a quiet reassurance. Luke ignored the comments and grabbed a cart. He moved through the aisles with methodical precision. Rope, gloves, work lamp, masking tape, heavy-duty nails. Every movement calculated, steady. But his shoulders stayed tight, the same way they tightened when he walked into unfamiliar villages overseas. A group of teenagers entered the store, tracking in snow. One of them, a tall boy in a varsity jacket, grinned when he recognized Luke. "Hey, that's the guy who bought the death cabin." More laughter followed. Luke kept his eyes on the shelf, jaw tense. Rex sat beside the cart, watching the teenagers with that still, steady gaze that always made troublemakers reconsider. The boy nudged his friend. "Think he's moving in with the ghosts or what?" Another chimed in. "Bet the dog's smarter than he is." Luke's hand closed around the hammer he was about to place in the cart. Not in anger, just reflex. The weight in his palm reminded him of hot days spent building barricades overseas, nights spent following precise instructions under fire. The kind of days these boys had no idea existed. Martha stepped forward. "That's enough. Go get your sodas and head out." The teenagers quieted, but not before the tallest one muttered, "Crazy vet's gonna freeze by Thanksgiving." Rex rose onto all fours, not aggressive but alert, protective. Luke gently touched the dog's head. "It's fine," he whispered. "Let it go." At the counter, Martha rang up the supplies, her eyes softening slightly. "Listen," she said quietly. "I know folks talk. That ridge, it has history. Still, you're set on staying?" Luke nodded once. "I don't walk away from things." Martha sighed. "Then be careful. Winter's coming early this year." When Luke returned to the truck, Rex jumped into the passenger seat and curled into the blanket. Luke slid behind the wheel and exhaled, letting the tension bleed out through his fingertips. But the day wasn't done testing him. As he drove back up the mountain road, an old sheriff's cruiser pulled alongside him, lights off but unmistakable. The window rolled down, revealing Sheriff Alan Riker, late 40s, weathered face, calm eyes that missed nothing. "You must be Harlow," Riker said, voice mild. "Former Navy SEAL, right?" Luke nodded. "That's me. Name's Riker." He tipped his hat. "Mind if I take a look at that cabin of yours?" "Not at all." They drove up to the ridge together. Riker stepped out, boots crunching over the snow, and let out a low whistle as he studied the structure leaning against the wind. "You sure know how to pick a fight," he said. "Never been afraid of one." Rex moved between them, sniffing Riker's glove, tail giving a cautious wag. Riker scratched the dog behind the ear. "Good-looking shepherd. Military?" "Retired partner," Luke replied. Riker nodded knowingly. "Dogs like him don't retire. They just shift missions." For a moment the sheriff's tone shifted, gentle, perceptive. "Listen, Luke. I know that look you have. I've worn it myself. Cold nights, loud thoughts. Ridge like this can make it worse." Luke's jaw worked, but he didn't argue. Riker continued. "If it gets too quiet up here, you call me. Doesn't matter the hour." Luke appreciated the offer more than he said. "Thanks, we'll manage." Riker gave a half smile. "I'm not betting against you, but the rest of the town sure is." As the sheriff's cruiser rolled away, the ridge fell silent again, leaving Luke and Rex facing the fractured skeleton of their future. Luke took in a slow breath. "This is where it starts, boy." Rex pressed his head into Luke's hand, warm and steady against the cold. Behind them, the wind slipped through the cabin's broken boards with a sound that almost resembled breathing. The land felt watchful, as if waiting to see whether this new man and his loyal dog would endure, or join the ridge's long memory of failure. Whatever mockery waited in Mill Creek, Luke Harlow wasn't turning back. Not now, not ever. The next morning, frost coated the ground in a thin white crust, glittering under the pale sun as Luke and Rex stepped out of the truck. The air bit harder up on Blacktail Ridge, the kind of cold that warned a man winter was coming fast. Luke stood for a long moment, taking in the broken silhouette of the cabin. Today wouldn't be about imagining possibilities. It would be about survival, his and the cabin's. "All right, partner," he murmured, tightening his gloves. "Let's start tearing this place apart." Rex let out a soft grunt, as if approving the order. Luke began with the roof, or what remained of it. The collapsed beams lay twisted like old ribs. Shards of shingle and splinters stuck out from frozen drifts of debris. Rex stayed on the perimeter, pacing slow, steady circles while keeping his eyes on the surrounding woods. Every gust of wind, every distant snap of a branch, he registered with a low flick of his ears. Using a crowbar, Luke pried the first rotted plank loose. It broke in his hands, crumbling into soggy dust. He worked methodically, clearing out the debris piece by piece, building a growing pile near the path. The cold seeped into his bones, and the repetitive strain woke old aches in his shoulder, injuries earned overseas and never fully healed. Hours passed. Each breath hung in the air like a fading cloud. His muscles burned, sweat chilled under his shirt, and still he kept going. He had rebuilt lives under enemy fire. He could rebuild a roof under a Montana sky. But the cabin wasn't the only thing testing him. Every bang of wood against wood echoed sharply, too sharply. The sound ricocheted in his mind, stirring memories he didn't want. A blast of wind rumbled through the ridge, and for a heartbeat, Luke felt himself back in a different place. Dust swirling around him, adrenaline rising, someone shouting behind him. Rex barked sharply, snapping him free. Luke froze, hand braced against a beam, breath stuck in his chest. Rex stepped forward, placing his weight gently against Luke's thigh. Just enough contact to ground him, to remind him that he was here, not there. That the only enemy on this ridge was time. "I'm all right," Luke whispered, though the edge in his voice betrayed him. Rex didn't move away. He stayed pressed close until Luke's breathing leveled and the past dissolved back into silence. With the moment past, Luke returned to the demolition, more focused than before. He tore out 3 more sections of the collapsed roof. Then, as he dragged the remnants outside, a coyote crept too close to the perimeter, hunger gleaming in its yellow eyes. Rex saw it first. With one deep bark, he sprinted forward, hackles raised, placing himself between Luke and the predator. The coyote hesitated. They weren't accustomed to military-trained shepherds guarding human ground. After a tense standoff, it slunk back into the trees. Luke watched Rex return, proud and silent, tail steady but vigilant. "Good boy," he said softly. "Always watching my 6." By late afternoon, the cabin's entire roof was gone. All that remained were the skeletal rafters Luke planned to salvage, and even those groaned in the wind like tired old bones. The interior lay exposed to the open sky, a hollow shell, raw and fragile. Still, progress was progress. Luke walked through the space, imagining walls straightened, beams replaced, warmth returning. He could almost see Rex curled beside a new fireplace, snow falling safely outside instead of drifting through broken walls. That fragile hope lasted exactly 10 seconds. Behind him, laughter drifted up the ridge. Luke turned to see the same group of teenagers from Mill Creek standing by their pickup near the road, pointing and snickering. The tallest one cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hey, Harlow, you building a home or digging a grave?" More laughter. One boy mimed, shivering dramatically. Another called, "Don't freeze before you finish the roof." Luke said nothing. He didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Rex, however, trotted to Luke's side and stared at the boys with a look that made even the loudest one stop mid-sentence. The truck eventually pulled away, kicking up dirt and snow. Luke released a long breath and returned inside. "Ignore it," he told Rex. "Noise passes, work stays." And so he worked until the sky darkened into indigo, until lantern light cast long shadows across the ridge. He pried out every last unstable board, reinforced the corner posts, and cleared rotten flooring. His gloves wore thin, his breath fogged in the cold, his shoulders trembled with fatigue. But when he stepped back at last, lantern flickering in the open space, he saw something he hadn't seen before. Shape. Order. A beginning. The cabin wasn't whole, but now it wasn't collapsing either. It stood straighter, borders clearer, the ground ready for rebuilding. Not bad for day one, Luke murmured. Rex pressed into his side again, warm and loyal, as if saying he agreed. As Luke packed up his tools and the wind swept more snow across the ridge, he couldn't shake the shift he sensed. The neighbors' mocking had grown quieter. His own resolve had grown louder. Small victories, fragile but real, and tomorrow he would chase bigger ones. Morning light rolled across Blacktail Ridge like a slow tide of pale gold, but the warmth never reached the ground. The temperature had dropped overnight, sharp, brittle cold that stung Luke's cheeks the moment he stepped outside. Rex trotted ahead, nose low, breath puffing white in steady bursts. The dog's movements were tighter today, more alert, as if he sensed something shifting long before Luke noticed it. The sky had that look Montana folks feared, thin gray stretched too taut, like fabric ready to tear. It meant winter wasn't coming. It was already here. Luke worked fast. He reinforced the last corner post, tightened rope supports, and laid out the beams for tomorrow's rebuild. His routine felt almost military again. Steady rhythms, precise movements, discipline holding him upright. By midday, he and Rex drove back into Mill Creek for lumber. As the truck rolled down Main Street, Luke noticed clusters of people talking outside the diner, the hardware store, even the barber shop. They weren't whispering this time. They were watching him, and some weren't hiding their smirks. When he entered Bishop's general store, Martha Bishop met him with a sigh that felt both heavy and resigned. "You hear the news?" she asked. Luke grabbed a cart. "What news?" Martha leaned on the counter. "Folks are placing bets now, on how long you'll last up there." Luke paused only briefly. "Doesn't matter." But Martha kept going. "Some say you'll quit before the first real snow. Others say the search and rescue boys will find you half frozen by Christmas. Last I heard, the pot's up to $200. Rex growled under his breath. Martha raised her hands. "Don't look at me. I told 'em to knock it off. But you know this town. Once they get an idea in their heads, it spreads like brush fire." Luke turned away, grabbing nails and lumber markers. He wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of being measured by people who'd never carried the weight he had. Tired of the echoes in his head that already told him he wasn't enough. The store's door chimed again, and Sheriff Alan Riker stepped inside. He brushed snow off his jacket and nodded toward Luke. "Can we talk?" Riker asked. Luke followed him outside, Rex at his heel. Riker leaned against his cruiser. "Winter's coming early. Storm patterns look ugly. If you're planning to finish that roof, you're running out of time." Luke crossed his arms. "I know." Riker studied him with the quiet patience of a man who had seen soldiers fall apart silently. "Some folks bet because they think it's funny. Others bet because they think you won't ask for help. I don't need help." "Everyone needs help," Riker replied. "Even men who spent their lives helping others." The sheriff's gaze drifted to Rex. "Your dog watches you like he knows you're hurting." Luke didn't answer. He didn't have to. Riker had already read the truth. "Flashbacks?" Riker asked quietly. Luke's jaw tightened. Some days are louder than others. Rex pressed against Luke's leg again, steady and loyal. Riker nodded. "Well, I'm not betting against you. But if things get rough, call me. Day or night." Luke nodded once, a gesture of respect between men who recognized the same scars in each other. By the time Luke and Rex returned to the ridge, snowflakes drifted like scattered ash from the low sky. The wind had changed directions, coming sharper from the north. Rex lifted his muzzle, sniffing the air, ears flicking. Luke set to work again, but the sounds around him kept shifting. A hammer strike echoed like a rifle crack. A gust of wind hissed like a warning. For a split second, the ridge dissolved and he was somewhere else. Heat on his face, dust rising, someone yelling for cover. He froze. Rex barked sharply, circling around, nudging Luke's knee with his head. Luke sucked in a breath, grounding himself. I'm good. But he wasn't. Not entirely. By late afternoon, he'd finished setting up the rafters he planned to replace the next day. The air felt heavier now, snow thickening, clouds rolling low, as if winter wanted to bury the cabin before he could save it. As they walked back toward the truck, Rex stopped suddenly, staring toward the tree line. His fur rose along his spine. Easy, Luke whispered. A faint rustle echoed from the woods, then silence. Rex stayed alert until they reached the truck, refusing to take his eyes off the trees. Luke wasn't sure if it was wildlife, wind, or the ridge itself waiting to see if he'd break. That night, as he crawled into his sleeping bag inside the half-sheltered space of the cabin, the wind howled through the open rafters, chilling every breath. Luke stared at the dark sky through the broken roof and felt the weight of the town's expectations pressed down like snow. Rex laid beside him, head on his chest, heartbeat steady. Luke placed a hand on the dog's fur. They think we won't make it. Rex breathed softly, calm and certain. Luke closed his eyes. Let's prove them wrong. But proving anyone wrong meant nothing to the storm gathering over Blacktail Ridge. By sunrise, the sky had already swallowed its own light. Heavy gray clouds churned low, like a ceiling sagging under the weight of bad intentions. The wind cut sharper, colder. Rex sensed the danger immediately, his pacing quick, nose high, ears pinned forward. Luke stepped outside and saw snow beginning to swirl, light at first, but restless. The forecast hadn't called for a storm yet. Montana didn't care. He tightened his coat and got to work, knowing today would decide whether the cabin lived long enough for him to rebuild it. He lifted the first rafter into place, balancing its weight on his shoulder. Breath puffed white as he hammered the new brace into position. Rex circled the perimeter in a slow, practiced patrol, checking blind spots, scanning tree lines. The dog's movements were efficient, disciplined, familiar. They had done this dance before in deserts and conflict zones, only now the danger was ice instead of fire. Luke hoisted another beam. Wind roared across the ridge, knocking snow off the pines in thick bursts. Too early for this, Luke muttered, planting his boots deeper into the frozen ground. Then the storm struck for real. It hit like a wall, gusts slamming into the half-built roof, snow spiraling with sudden fury. Loose wood clattered. Tarp snapped violently. Rex barked once, sharp and warning. Luke looked up just in time to see the weak section of the old frame shudder under the pressure. "Hold," he started. It didn't hold. With a groan like something dying, the remaining spine of the old roof snapped, sending a cascade of rotted timber crashing toward him. Luke's reflexes fired, but not fast enough. The beams were coming down too quickly, too unpredictably. Rex launched himself across the snow. The dog slammed into Luke's side with full force, knocking him out of the collapse zone. Luke hit the ground hard, air bursting from his lungs. Snow and shattered wood rained down behind him, filling the space where he had stood a heartbeat earlier. "Rex!" The dog yelped once, short, pained. Luke scrambled forward, heart dropping into his stomach. Rex limped from the debris, shoulder low, breath fast and shallow. The dog's eyes remained alert, but pain tightened the muscles around them. Luke knelt immediately, running careful hands along Rex's leg and ribs. "Easy, buddy. Easy." No broken bones. That was good. But the shoulder was strained, swollen under the fur. Luke exhaled shakily, a cold tremor rippling through him. "You saved my life again," he whispered. Rex nudged his hand, as if dismissing the praise. The dog wanted Luke back on his feet. The storm didn't care about their moment, and neither could Luke. He carried Rex into the truck cab, laid him on the blanket, and wrapped a coat around him. "Stay. Rest. I've got to finish the roof." Rex whimpered low, not in fear, but in frustration. He didn't like being sidelined. "I know," Luke said, "but this part's on me." He stepped back into the storm. Snow stung his face like needles. The wind howled through the empty frame of the cabin, turning it into a broken instrument that sang of danger. Luke worked fast, fueled by adrenaline, fear, and stubbornness. He tore down the unstable sections, letting the storm take what it wanted, and rebuilt from the strongest points. Hammer strikes bounced through his arms. His fingers numbed. His breath burned in his chest. It didn't matter. This roof was going up today, storm or not. By late afternoon, the worst gusts slowed. The sky still rumbled with distant thunder, but the ridge had stopped trying to tear itself apart. Luke's hands shook violently as he set the last few shingles. Lanterns hung from temporary hooks, casting flickering rays through the swirling snow. He drove each nail with precision born of necessity and muscle memory. One wrong strike could snap the cold wood. Lantern light trembled. The snow thickened again. Luke pushed harder, pacing himself like he had on long missions when fatigue was the enemy and dawn was the finish line. The final shingle slid into place. With numb fingers, he hammered the last nail until the sound echoed across the ridge. A single, solid note of completion. Luke stepped back, chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. Under the lantern glow, the roof stood strong, reinforced, sealed, ready to withstand the storm's full weight. A tight, exhausted smile broke across his face. He staggered to the truck and opened the door. Rex lifted his head, ears perked despite the pain. "We did it," Luke whispered, stroking the dog's neck. "We made it." Rex pressed his muzzle into Luke's hand, warm and trusting. Outside, the storm roared on, but inside the truck, man and dog shared a small victory, one earned through blood, instinct, and the loyalty that had already saved them both more times than they could count. Tonight, the ridge had tried to break them, and tonight, they had stayed standing. The next morning arrived in a hush of silver light. Snow blanketed the ridge, softening every jagged edge, muting every echo. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world so still it almost felt respectful. Luke stepped out of the truck and took in the sight of the cabin, its new roof holding firm under a fresh layer of snow. For the first time since he'd seen the place, the structure didn't look doomed. It looked like it wanted to live. Rex limped gently to his side, tail wagging once before he settled into a sit. His injured shoulder was swollen, but the dog's eyes burned with that quiet resolve Luke had leaned on through years of deployments. "Easy today," Luke said softly, kneeling beside him. "You protected me. Now let me take care of you." Rex bumped his nose into Luke's palm, conceding with a heavy sigh. With the cabin safe from the elements, Luke turned his attention inward. The interior was little more than dirt, debris, and memory, but it was sheltered now, and that meant he could begin shaping it into something real, something warm. Inside, dust motes floated through beams of sunlight streaming from the newly secured roofline. The open rafters cast long shadows across the floor, creating a pattern that reminded Luke of the barracks lights overseas, harsh yet dependable. Only this time, there was no shouting, no alarms, no distant thunder of artillery. Just silence. A good silence. Luke began clearing the cabin interior, sorting wood into piles, burnable, repairable, and hopeless. He worked slow but steady, taking care not to jar the fragile new stability of the structure. Every plank removed made the place breathe easier. Rex lay at the doorway, watching with steady eyes. Occasionally he'd lift his head to track a bird or sniff the air, but he didn't try to stand. Luke made sure of that. By midday, he had cleared enough space to lay down the foundation for a proper floor. He measured and cut boards, fitting them like puzzle pieces over the dirt. His hands moved with practiced skill, rhythm returning to him like an old song. Back in his SEAL days, they had built emergency shelters in deserts, mountains, and jungles, structures meant to save lives, not last. But this cabin, this effort, was different, permanent, personal. He set the final plank in place and stepped back. The cabin felt different already, less like a ruin, more like a skeleton ready to be fleshed out. "You seeing this, buddy?" Luke asked. Rex's tail swept the floor twice, slow and approving. Next came the fireplace. Without it, the ridge would claim him the moment temperatures dropped again. Luke hauled stones from a creek bed half a mile away, stacking them carefully along the north wall. Each stone was placed with intention, forming a hearth that would hold heat and hope in equal measure. By evening, as the horizon burned orange and the first shadows stretched long across the ridge, Luke lit the fire for the first time. Flames caught, crackled, then roared alive. The heat washed through the cabin, turning the cold air into something gentle, almost welcoming. Rex rose slowly and moved closer, settling near the warmth with a soft grunt of relief. His eyes fluttered half shut, the tension in his body loosening for the first time since the storm. Luke sat beside him, leaning his back against a newly reinforced beam. The fire painted the walls with amber light. Outside, wind whispered softly, no longer trying to rip the cabin apart. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. For the first time, Luke let himself breathe deeply. They had earned this warmth. Every nail, every bruise, every moment of doubt, it all led here. Rex shifted suddenly, ears twitching. His gaze dropped to the floorboards near the center of the cabin, the same spot where he'd reacted days earlier. He stared at it now with quiet intensity, head tilted, nose picking up something hidden beneath the wood. Luke followed his gaze. "Still thinking about that hatch, huh?" Rex didn't look away. Luke tapped his fingers thoughtfully against his knee. The trapdoor could wait. It had to. Winter came first. Safety came first. But the dog's instincts were rarely wrong. And the way Rex watched that spot now, eyes sharp even in the fireplace glow, made Luke uneasy. "Tomorrow," Luke murmured. "We'll take a look tomorrow." Rex blinked once and slow, as if accepting the deal. The fire popped loudly, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Luke leaned back, exhaustion settling into him like a heavy coat. But it was a peaceful exhaustion, earned through honest labor, not survival. Night fell quietly across Blacktail Ridge. Snow glimmered outside the window frames. The wind had softened to a gentle hum, brushing against the cabin walls as if testing their strength, only to find them holding firm. Luke closed his eyes briefly, listening to Rex's steady breathing beside him. For the first time since stepping foot on the ridge, the cabin felt like a place a man could stay, maybe even heal. Warmth flickered across his face, reminding him of all they had rebuilt, together. And beyond that warmth, beneath the floorboards, something waited. But the ridge wasn't concerned with secrets tonight. It was preparing something far more dangerous. By dawn the next morning, the air felt wrong, still, heavy. Rex sensed it before Luke even opened his eyes. The dog paced the cabin with short, tense steps, nails clicking anxiously against the new wood floor. When Luke stepped outside, A sharp wind sliced across his cheeks and the sky looked bruised. Dark purple clouds rolling like thunderheads pressed too close to the earth. "This isn't good," Luke murmured. Rex stood beside him, ears forward, tail stiff. He had planned to investigate the hatch today, but nature had other plans. And on Blacktail Ridge, nature always won. The storm hit before noon. It didn't arrive gently. There was no gradual curtain of soft flakes to warn them. It came instead like a furious wave, sweeping across the valley with a roar that rattled the window frames. Snow blasted sideways, erasing the world beyond a few feet. The pines bent under the wind, groaning like ships at sea. Luke secured the tools, reinforced the outer tarp he'd hung temporarily over the unfinished wall seam, and ensured the fire burned hot inside the stone hearth. He checked Rex's shoulder, still tender but healing. The dog hardly rested, pacing between the door and window. "Easy, boy," Luke said. But Rex wouldn't settle. The howl of the wind was relentless. Each gust felt like a predator testing the cabin's new bones. Luke fed the fire again, watching sparks climb the chimney. The flames danced bright, but even inside the cabin's warm shell, the storm pressed against the walls like it wanted in. Hours passed. Outside, the ridge disappeared completely beneath a swirling white void. Then Rex stopped pacing. His head snapped toward the window, a sharp, instinctive movement. His ears locked forward, body stiff with urgency. "What is it?" Luke asked, stepping beside him. Rex barked. Loud, insistent. The kind of bark he used in the field. The one that meant move. Now. Luke threw on his coat and opened the door, fighting against the wind as snow blasted into the cabin. Rex bolted ahead, nose down, pushing through drifts nearly to his chest. Luke followed as quickly as he could. The cold bit through his jacket, stinging his skin, stealing his breath. Visibility was almost nothing, just a blur of white and shifting shadows. "Rex!" Luke shouted, barely hearing his own voice. Then he saw it. A dark shape down the slope. A vehicle, partially buried in the ditch where the mountain road curved. Its headlights flickered weakly through the wind, like a distress signal fading into the storm. A crashed SUV. Heart pounding, Luke pushed forward, snow swallowing his boots. Rex reached the wreck first, pawing at the door, barking desperately. Luke grabbed the frozen handle, yanked hard, and forced it open against the weight of snow. Inside was a nightmare of cold. A man slumped over the steering wheel, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. A woman in the passenger seat clutched two children, one crying weakly, the other silent, frighteningly still. Their skin was pale, lips turning blue. "Oh no," Luke breathed. "We're running out of time." The woman blinked up at him, eyes glazed. Please, help us," Luke acted instantly. "I've got you, all of you." He pulled the smallest child out first, a boy no older than 4, and wrapped him inside his own coat. The boy didn't react. His eyelids fluttered without focus. Rex pressed his warm body against the child's legs, trying to bring heat where the cold had stolen it. Luke lifted the man next, draping him over his shoulder. The woman followed, clutching her older child to her chest. The wind screamed around them as they climbed the slope. Snow slid beneath Luke's boots, but he kept going, teeth grit, muscles burning. Each breath hurt like ice in his lungs. Rex circled them, barking encouragement, guiding the path through the blinding storm. By the time they reached the cabin door, Luke's arms trembled from the strain. He kicked the door open and ushered the family inside. The fire sputtered from the sudden blast of cold air, but Luke knelt immediately beside it, setting the smallest child closest to the heat. "Rex, stay with him," he commanded. Rex curled around the boy, pressing every ounce of warmth into his small body. Luke turned to the woman, Meredith Conway, as she shakily introduced herself between chattering teeth. Her husband, Daniel, barely responded, disoriented and weak. Their oldest child sobbed softly, face pressed against her mother's coat. Luke moved into action. Blankets, warm water compresses, firewood, triage. His hands moved with the steady precision of a combat medic. His voice remained calm even as fear squeezed his chest. "Stay awake," he instructed the man. "Stay with me. You're going to be all right." Meredith clutched her children, tears freezing on her cheeks. We thought we were going to die out there." "You're safe now," Luke said, though he wasn't sure how safe any of them really were tonight. The storm slammed against the cabin walls, a reminder that they'd made it inside by minutes, maybe less. Rex adjusted his position, laying his full weight across the smallest boy. The fire's glow reflected in the dog's determined eyes. He wouldn't move. Wouldn't rest, not until the child's breathing steadied. Luke knelt beside them, watching as color slowly, painfully returned to the boy's cheeks. Outside, the blizzard raged on, hunting everything trapped in its path. Inside, a former SEAL and his loyal K9 held the line. Two soldiers fighting a new kind of battle, one family's fragile life depending on their warmth and will. The ridge had shown its teeth today, but Luke and Rex weren't done fighting. Inside the cabin, the storm's fury battered the walls like a living thing, but the fire glowed strong, throwing warm light across the room. Luke moved quickly, placing heavy blankets on the floor and guiding the Conway family closer to the heat. Rex stayed cemented to the youngest child, his injured shoulder forgotten as he pressed his body firmly against the boy's legs and torso, sharing every ounce of warmth he could. Luke checked the man first, Daniel Conway. His pulse was slow but steady. Hypothermia, early onset, likely mild concussion from the crash. Luke cleaned the cut on his forehead and wrapped it tightly. Meredith Conway watched with trembling hands, clutching her daughter to her chest. Is he going to be all right?" Luke nodded. "He's cold, not gone. The warmth will bring him back." Then Luke turned to the children. The little girl, Emily, was crying softly, her skin painfully pale but responsive. He wrapped another blanket around her and sat her close to the fire. The youngest child, Michael, lay beneath Rex's steady weight. The boy's breathing was shallow, almost lost under the storm's roar. Luke knelt beside them, his hand moving across Michael's cheek. "Come on, little guy. Stay with us." Rex's tail thumped once, protective and insistent. Luke removed his coat and layered it over the boy. He placed 2 warm compresses beneath Michael's arms, an emergency method he'd learned long ago during survival training. As he worked, memories flashed uninvited across his mind. Cold nights on deployment, men fading in the sand or snow, the helplessness of knowing help was too far away. Not tonight. Not this boy. Luke stayed with him, counting breaths, adjusting the compresses, speaking softly. "You're safe now. You're going to be warm again. Just breathe." Minutes stretched. The storm howled. Fire popped. Rex barely blinked. Then Michael's fingers twitched. A tiny movement, but a life returning all the same. Meredith sobbed with relief. Emily crawled closer, watching her brother with wide, frightened eyes. Luke smiled faintly, exhaustion tugging at the edges of his features. "See? He's stronger than the storm." Rex leaned down and licked the boy's cheek once, gentle and reassuring. Daniel finally stirred. "What happened?" His voice was slurred, disoriented. "You slid off the road," Luke said. "Your wheel hit a ditch. You weren't going to last much longer out there." Meredith covered her mouth, tears streaming. "We were trying to get to my sister's house. The storm came out of nowhere." Luke nodded. That's how they come up here. Daniel slowly sat up, holding his head. Why'd you come looking? I didn't, Luke replied quietly. He did. Rex lifted his head at the sound of his name. The dog? Daniel asked, stunned. Rex heard something in the wind, Luke explained. He wouldn't stop until I followed him. Meredith looked at the dog as if seeing a guardian angel. He saved our children. Rex lowered his head again, continuing to warm Michael without complaint. Thunder rolled across the ridge, vibrating through the cabin walls. Luke added more wood to the fire, feeding the flames until they blazed bright. Heat spread through the room, and gradually, the Conways' shivers eased. Luke checked Michael again. The boy's breathing had deepened. His lips regained color. His eyelids fluttered open as he looked up at Rex's face hovering above him. Doggy, he whispered weakly. Meredith broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Luke placed a steady hand on her shoulder. He's going to be okay. She shook her head, overwhelmed. Why did you help us? You don't even know us. Luke paused. The firelight flickered across his features, casting faint shadows beneath his eyes. Because someone once helped me, he said softly. And because up here, winter doesn't forgive anyone. We don't leave people behind. Meredith nodded, tears falling silently. Outside, the storm's fury began to shift, still strong, but no longer growing. The worst of it had passed. The cabin held, the roof held, and everyone inside had made it through the hour that mattered most. Rex finally allowed himself to rest his head across Michael's legs. The boy curled into him as naturally as if the dog had been his guardian all his life. Luke watched flames dance in the hearth, exhaustion settling slow but sure into his bones. For the first time since arriving on Blacktail Ridge, the cabin felt full, not with fear or wind or ghosts, but with breath and warmth and life. Sheriff Riker arrived the next morning, driving through thick snow in his cruiser. Luke stepped outside as the sheriff approached, Rex limping behind him, but with his tail swinging high. You were busy last night, Riker said, surveying the scene inside through the open door. Heard you saved a whole family. Luke shrugged slightly. Rex did most of that. Riker studied the dog before turning back to Luke, his expression softening with sincerity. You two are something else. Folks around here call it a miracle. Luke shook his head. No miracle, just being in the right place. Riker rested a hand on Luke's shoulder. Sometimes that's the miracle. Inside the cabin, the Conways slept peacefully, alive because Luke and Rex refused to ignore a cry in the storm. The ridge had taken many lives in winters past, but last night, man and dog had stood between a family and the cold, refusing to yield, and the mountain seemed quieter for it. By mid-morning, the storm's roar had faded into a soft hush across Blacktail Ridge. Snow draped the land in thick, perfect white, untouched, except for the footprints leading from the K9’s to the half-buried SUV. Inside, the Conway family slept soundly near the dying fire, bundled in blankets, safe in a place the town once called cursed. Luke stepped out into the pale sunlight, the cold crisp and clean. Rex stood beside him, shoulder sore but tail lifted proudly. The dog sniffed the breeze, slow, satisfied sniffs that confirmed the danger had passed. They had survived the storm. More importantly, they had helped others survive it too. It didn't take long for the news to spread. Sheriff Riker made the calls himself. By noon, curious neighbors began arriving on the ridge, their trucks crunching over snow as they climbed the winding path toward the cabin. Luke heard the first engine hours before he saw it. Rex's ears perked, but his posture remained calm. The first to arrive was Thomas Garrett, a rancher with a thick beard and a reputation for keeping to himself. He stepped out of his truck, staring at Luke in disbelief. "Heard you pulled a whole family out of that storm," Thomas said, voice gruff but respectful. "Didn't think anyone could survive a night like that." Luke shrugged slightly. "We just did what we could." Thomas looked past him to the repaired cabin roof, then down at Rex. "Dog of yours. He's something special." Rex lifted his head with modest dignity, as though accepting a compliment he already knew to be true. Next came Martha Bishop, trudging up the path with a cardboard box in her arms. Luke nearly didn't recognize her without her usual stern expression. Today she looked humbled. She stopped at the porch and set the box down. "Groceries, fresh bread, some jerky, a few things to keep you warm." Luke blinked. "You didn't have to do this." Martha exhaled, her breath forming clouds. "I misjudged you. Judged your dog, too. I shouldn't have. Folks have been talking about what you did." Her eyes softened. "We're grateful you were up here." As she turned to leave, Rex trotted forward and nudged her hand. Martha let out a surprised laugh and scratched behind his ears. "Well, aren't you just a gentleman?" she said. One by one, more people arrived. Some brought blankets. Others brought firewood. A few just came to say thank you. And with each handshake, each nod, the tone was different, no longer mocking, no longer dismissive. Respect. That's what Luke heard in their voices now. Later in the afternoon, a reporter from the local paper climbed the ridge. A woman in her 30s, bundled in a long coat, cheeks rosy from the cold. "Luke Harlow?" she asked. "I'm Claire Donner from the Mill Creek Gazette. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Luke hesitated. "I'm not looking for attention." Claire smiled. "It's not about attention. What you and your dog did last night. People want to hear something good in times like these." Luke glanced at Rex, who was sitting in the snow with a patient, almost regal look. "All right," Luke said quietly. "But keep the focus on the family and on Rex." Claire interviewed him near the porch while Rex lounged behind him, occasionally lifting his head as if to confirm the facts being spoken. Claire took notes quickly, pausing to look at the cabin. "People called this place cursed," she said. "After last night, they're calling it the Miracle on Blacktail Ridge." Luke let out a quiet breath. "I don't know about miracles." "Then call it something else," Claire replied. "But you saved lives. That matters." When she left, the ridge returned to silence, warm silence, the kind that felt like good news lingering in the air. Inside, the Conways were awake. Meredith hugged Luke tightly, whispering gratitude through tears. Daniel shook his hand firmly, saying, "You gave us a second chance." Emily drew a picture of Rex with crayon, labeling him Hero Dog. Michael simply crawled into Rex's fur and fell asleep again, small hands gripping the dog's coat like a lifeline. Luke watched them, overwhelmed by a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. As dusk approached, the neighbors' trucks disappeared down the ridge one by one. The last rays of sunlight caught the cabin windows, casting warm gold across the snow. Rex lay on the porch beside Luke, resting his chin on his paws. "You see what happened today?" Luke asked him. "They're not laughing anymore." Rex's tail thumped once. The laughter that once followed him everywhere in Mill Creek was gone. In its place was a quiet shift, a recognition that the man they mocked, the cabin they dismissed, and the dog they underestimated had stood strong against the worst winter could offer. Luke stood on the porch, arms crossed against the cold, and looked out over the valley. For the first time, Blacktail Ridge didn't feel lonely. It felt like home beginning to open its doors, and the ridge, once skeptical of the man and the dog who dared claim it, seemed to bow in silent approval in the fading light. But the ridge wasn't finished with Luke or Rex. And beneath the new warmth of the cabin, the past waited patiently. The storm had passed. The Conways had been taken safely to town, and Blacktail Ridge lay quiet in the soft glow of morning. Luke stood outside with Rex at his side, breathing in the crisp air. The peace felt earned, the kind of peace that made a man feel settled. But Rex's gaze drifted once more to the same spot on the cabin floor, the one he'd been tracking since the first day they stepped inside. The buried hatch. Luke had pushed it aside through storms and exhaustion, but now, with the roof solid, the walls stronger, and the family safe, there was no reason to ignore it anymore. "All right," Luke said, brushing snow from his gloves. "Let's see what you've been trying to tell me." Rex followed him inside, limping only slightly now, though his posture remained sharp. Luke moved aside the small rug near the center of the floor and knelt, pressing his palm to the wooden planks. Beneath them, the faint outline of a trapdoor emerged, weathered but unmistakable. With the pry bar in hand, Luke wedged the metal edge beneath the seam and pushed. The wood groaned, dust rising in a soft cloud. Rex stepped back, nose twitching. The hatch lifted. A cold draft drifted upward, carrying the smell of earth and old machinery. Luke lowered a lantern into the darkness and saw the outline of a narrow stairwell leading down. Concrete walls, reinforcement bars. Not a cellar, a bunker. "Cold War construction," Luke murmured. "What were they doing up here?" Rex descended first, nose working, tail lowered in caution. Luke followed, boots echoing softly as he stepped onto the concrete floor. The lantern cast long shadows across the room, shadows that revealed the shape of shelving units, metal equipment, and dusty crates stacked neatly despite the years of abandonment. On the far wall hung a faded map of the ridge, marked with notes and lines drawn in red pencil. Luke moved closer, breath slowing as he studied it. The handwriting was neat, steady, the kind of handwriting belonging to someone meticulous, someone who feared being ignored. Beside the map lay several journals bound in cracked leather. He opened the first one. November 12th. "The soil readings on the north slope worry me. The land is shifting faster than the county believes." Luke flipped through the pages. Diagrams, calculations, warnings. Another entry stopped him cold. January 3rd. "I contacted the county again today. They think I'm overreacting. But if the ground gives way, homes below will be in danger. I fear winter will accelerate the movement." Rex let out a soft whine, nudging Luke's elbow. "I know," Luke whispered, heart sinking. He tried to warn them. The image formed slowly. The previous owner, an Air Force technician, disciplined, precise, had lived up here to monitor the ridge. He'd seen signs of a potential landslide, something the officials had dismissed. Luke opened another journal. A final line hit him like a hammer. "If the county won't act, I'll reinforce the cabin myself. It won't fix everything, but maybe someone will see the truth buried here when it's too late for me." Luke closed the journal slowly, absorbing the weight of it. The family who died here. They hadn't frozen because they were careless. They hadn't died because the ridge was cursed. They died trying to protect others. And the truth, ignored, buried, forgotten, had waited beneath the cabin all along. Rex walked toward a corner where a metal crate sat half open. Inside were old tools, heavy-duty braces, steel rods designed to strengthen structures in unstable ground. Luke touched the cold metal, realization hitting deeper. "They weren't building a bunker for themselves," he said. "They were trying to stabilize the ridge." He stood in silence, lantern casting his shadow across the journals. Rex sat beside him, leaning into his leg, as if sensing the heaviness of the discovery. Luke swallowed. They weren't crazy. They weren't careless. They were trying to save people, and no one listened. A quiet anger stirred in him, not sharp or wild, but deep and steady. The kind of anger that came from knowing someone's efforts had been dismissed, someone's life lost because warnings went unheard. It resonated with the part of him that had watched well-trained soldiers fall because no one back home believed the ground reality. Luke ran a hand along Rex's back. "We'll make this right." He climbed the stairs again, lantern in hand, stepping back into the warm cabin. The fire crackled softly, a reminder of life continuing despite tragedy. Light from the window fell across the journals in his hands. For years, people had feared the cabin, mocked it, avoided it. They never knew it was built by someone who fought for them until his last breath. Luke set the journals atop the table and looked around the cabin. His cabin, strengthened by his hands, protected by his dog's instincts, and now rooted in a truth deeper than he imagined. Blacktail Ridge wasn't cursed. It was misunderstood. And now, it belonged to someone who wouldn't ignore its warnings. Rex sat beside the hearth, eyes watching Luke with steady trust. "We're finishing this place right," Luke told him. "For them, for us, for whoever lives here next." Outside, the wind whispered softly along the ridge, no longer hostile, almost approving, as if the mountain had waited decades for someone to uncover its buried truth and finally understand its story. Luke rested his hand on Rex's head. "Come on, buddy," he said. "We've got more work to do." The dog rose at once, ready. Above them, sunlight broke through the clouds in thin, golden bands, light finally touching the ridge that had lived too long in shadow. In the days that followed, the snow softened, melting into quiet streams that threaded down the mountain. Winter loosened its grip on Blacktail Ridge, revealing the land beneath, the twisted brush, the rocky soil, and the cabin that now stood straight and unyielding against the brightening sky. Luke stepped outside each morning and breathed in air that finally felt less like survival and more like renewal. With the journals safely stored on the table inside, Luke spent time studying the old owner's notes. The diagrams were meticulous, the warnings were sound, and the steel rods in the bunker were enough to reinforce the cabin further, stabilizing it against the shifting earth. "Man tried to save lives," Luke murmured, running a thumb over a penciled line in the margin, "and nobody listened." Rex lay beside him, chin resting on Luke's boot, eyes warm and understanding. Luke set the journal aside. "We're not letting that story end in the dark, not again." He couldn't change the past, but he could honor it. And that began with rebuilding the ridge's sense of truth. A week after the storm, Sheriff Riker rumbled up the mountain road in his cruiser. He stepped out with a steaming thermos in hand. "Martha told me to bring you this," Riker said. "Said you looked like you've been living on canned soup and stubbornness." Luke chuckled softly. "She's not wrong." Riker handed him the thermos and stepped inside the cabin. His gaze passed over the sturdy roof, the reinforced beams, the fireplace glowing bright. "Hard to believe this is the same place that scared half this county for 20 years. "That fear wasn't the cabin's doing," Luke said. "It was the unknown under it." Riker studied him a moment longer. "Heard rumors you found something old down there." Luke nodded. Truth that was ignored. The sheriff didn't ask for details, not out of disinterest, but respect. "Well, whatever you found, it's changed things. People talk about you differently now." "I didn't fix this place for them." "I know," Riker replied. "But they still needed someone to show them they were wrong." Luke glanced at Rex, who nudged his hand, tail sweeping softly. Later that afternoon, more neighbors came, not to stare or gossip this time, but to learn. Word had spread that Luke was willing to teach basic winter safety, survival techniques, and emergency planning, skills he had lived by his entire adult life. Parents brought children. Ranchers brought notebooks. Even Martha Bishop arrived, standing proudly with a box of pastries like she was apologizing in baked form. Luke showed them how to track snow drift patterns, how to spot ground instability, how to create safe heat sources, and how to build makeshift shelters. Rex demonstrated obedience drills and search maneuvers, drawing laughter and admiration from the crowd. "Good dog," a little boy said, patting Rex's head. Rex tolerated it with patient dignity, though he looked up at Luke afterward as if to ask for confirmation that he was still a soldier and not just a celebrity. As sunset painted the valley in warm orange hues, Sheriff Riker pulled Luke aside. "How'd you like to make this official?" he asked. "Search and rescue could use someone who knows the mountain like you do. Someone who can train folks. Maybe even lead a volunteer team." Luke blinked, surprised. "I just got here. And you've already saved more people than most of us do in 10 years, Riker replied. "Town respects you, Luke. More than you know." Luke looked out over the ridge. The repaired cabin, the forgiving land, the neighbors waving goodbye as they climbed into their trucks. Rex leaned against his leg, steady as ever. Purpose, belonging, words he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "Yeah," Luke said finally. "I'd like that." The sheriff slapped his shoulder lightly. "Good. I'll start the paperwork." As the crowd dispersed and quiet settled back over the ridge, Luke and Rex stood on the porch watching the sky fade into soft twilight. Smoke rose from the chimney. Warmth glowed through the cabin windows. And Rex, now fully healed, sat proudly beside Luke, chest lifted, eyes scanning the land he had helped save. "You know," Luke said softly, "this place was supposed to break us." Rex huffed once as if amused by the idea. Luke's eyes softened. "But it didn't. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The dog pressed his head into Luke's hand, sealing the moment. Down the ridge, the town of Mill Creek twinkled with small lights as families settled into their homes. Homes that might never have known safety had Luke and Rex not been on this mountain during the storm. Word of the miracle traveled far beyond the valley. Folks spoke of a cabin once cursed, now redeemed, a soldier once lost, now found, and a dog whose instincts saved more than just his partner. In time, visitors would come to Blacktail Ridge to meet the man and dog who defied the winter. Children would run up the porch steps, eager to see Rex. Adults would ask Luke for guidance on how to prepare for storms, how to protect their families, how to build something strong from something broken. And every night, as snow fell softly and the wind hummed past the eaves, the cabin stood warm and bright against the darkness. The neighbors had laughed at Luke Harlow and his $1 cabin. They'd doubted Rex. They'd doubted the ridge. They'd doubted everything that didn't fit their idea of what survival looked like. But winter proved them wrong. And in doing so, it gave Luke something he'd never expected to find again. A home, a purpose, and a future built side by side with the dog who had never once stopped believing in him. The mountain no longer resisted them. It welcomed them. And for the first time since returning to civilian life, Luke felt whole. If you'd have stood your ground on that ridge too, drop a simple 1 in the comments. And if you believe a man and his dog deserve the right to rebuild their lives in peace, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Stick around and subscribe for more stories of justice, dignity, and the folks who won't back down from what's theirs.